Hello friends, welcome to another Hemmings Auctions Week in Review video. Today we're talking about cars from the 90s for a couple of reasons. First, just to remind you that we sell cars of all different eras on Hemmings Auctions, not just whatever time period you might assume from whatever you assume about Hemmings. And second, the 90s were awesome. And I say that not just because that's the era that this Volkswagen Eurovan is from, which I definitely do not live in. The 90s were a golden era in their own right. Horsepower was on the rise, technology was adding speed and comfort without destroying the driving experience, and automakers were trying all kinds of new ideas. And today, with Gen Xers and Millennials looking back at the era that they started driving in, 90s cars are hot on the collector market. Let's take a look. This 1996 Hummer H1 sold for $54,600, and the H1 was the civilian version of the Humvee military truck that, people that were old enough saw in the first Gulf War. And then later, Hummer turned into a brand on its own right with the H2 and the H3, and then it disappeared, and now it's back with a giant, huge 1,000 horsepower truck. So, let's go back to the original here, which is now like the cool grandfather of all this. These things could go anywhere. They had a torque bias differential that meant if any one wheel had traction, it could still move forward. It had portal axles. It had inboard brakes. The only problem with the gasoline engine ones was it was like 190 horsepower and they weighed like more than 3.5 tons. So it couldn't get out of its own way. So this example shows a popular solution for that, which was putting a 383 stroker in it so it could, actually not just go anywhere, but go anywhere before dinner time. The H1 version of these had a little extra creature comfort in terms of some trim and, nicer seats than the military version, but you still had that giant coffee table of a center differential in the middle. So there wasn't a lot of room. These are still brutish, but that's kind of what makes it cool. They're square, they're big. It's the perfect car for your modern survivalist cosplay. And again, with the new Hummer coming out, I think they're only destined to get hotter. Next up, this 1999 Ford Mustang GT convertible sold for $12,600. That's another thing that happened in the 90s. Ford finally replaced the Fox body Mustang after all those years. And then in 1999, they gave it a facelift and they called it the New Edge styling. Now it looks, totally turn of the century. It's a little weird to say turn of the century with the 2000s. Anyway, I like the styling. It looks cool now. These also had the modular V8. It was a 4.6 liter. It made 260 horsepower, which was still less than what the Firebirds and Camaros had at the time, but way better in terms of factory horsepower compared to the old 5.0. This particular car is super nice. It only had 31,800 miles. It looked really good. It had the 5-speed 35th anniversary package on it. It's just an example of how much you can get for this money. I mean, this is, about as nice as they come in terms of a GT and, not a huge price. You may or may not like the styling of the Plymouth Prowler, but you cannot deny one thing, which is they look like nothing else on the road. I still find it incredible that Chrysler made this. And besides the looks, it's easy to forget, this also had a groundbreaking all-aluminum construction. As an actual car, they were okay. The trunk was bad, and with the top down, it was even smaller. Inside was kind of cramped. You can't even really recline the seats, but it has air conditioning, it has cruise control, it has a cup holder. It's definitely the kind of car you could road trip and drive around. In 1999, it got the high output version of the V6 engine with 253 horsepower, which was good horsepower back then. And that gave it a 6-second 0 to 60 time, which again, in 1999 was pretty quick. This one that we sold had only 1,916 miles on it, which is a shame. It's just incredible that they made this. And if you have a Prowler, you should get out and drive it and show people that, once upon a time, automakers made things that looked this crazy. And, maybe they should try again. If you put the Plymouth Prowler next to the Mercedes-Benz SL, that just shows you the huge breadth of styling that you had in the 90s. The Prowler was rounded and old school. The Mercedes was super modern. It was very slabby. These things were also peak Mercedes-Benz. The story back then was that they would build the car first and then figure out how much to charge the customer after they knew what they put into it. It wasn't built to a cost. It was built to a standard. I love these. You can find other SLs for less money, especially with the V8. This one we're talking about is a 1995 SL600, sold for $33,600. It only had 18,000 miles on it. The seller had paint depth meter readings in the listing, had a video of the top going up and down. This is one of the nice ones. And also, It's just the same lesson over and over with a classic car. It's only original once. It is almost always cheaper to buy the expensive good car than the bargain project car. This Nissan 300ZX twin turbo sold for $25,200, and this was Nissan's entry into peak Japan sports car. Acura had the NSX, Mazda had the FD-RX-7, Mitsubishi had the 3000 GT, Toyota had the Supra, and talk about a golden era. This has never been matched since. It was amazing, and the 300ZX was really cool too. It had the twin turbo V6. It had those cool buttons mounted on the gauge instead of stalks. The lesson with the Mercedes is true here too. You are better off buying the good one, and that means that survivor cars like this will probably stay strong on prices. Last up, this 1993 Land Rover Range Rover Country sold for $29,138. Now that price was the result of a bidding fight that went on for about an hour after the original auction end time, but it also speaks to the fact that these things are pretty hot in the collector car market. At least two people wanted this one bad. And it's also one of those end of an era things that happened in the 90s, not unlike the Jeep Grand Wagoneer. The Range Rover dates back to 1969. They started making the four-door from the factory in 1981. And 1993 was the last year before they started making the new Range Rover. So yeah, Range Rover maintenance joke. They're super expensive. But actually, I do know someone with a Range Rover, and he pays his mechanic a lot of money, and it sits at the shop for weeks at a time. But let's be a little more fair to Range Rover, or at least acknowledge that all old cars can be super expensive to fix. They either have, an expensive part or some procedure that requires you to tear out the dash to do one tiny thing. It's not just Range Rover. These things wear out on older cars. But with the average new car over $40,000, even a $29,000 Range Rover leaves you a little bit of leeway to pay for those repairs. There's a practical appeal to cars from the 90s that isn't the case with cars from other eras. And that's just one more thing that I love about them. That's all I have this week. As always, please visit HemmingsAuctions.com. We have cars from the 90s as well as all other eras going up for new auctions every single day. We have premium classifieds. You can make an offer and maybe buy it right now. And we have an email newsletter where you get all of those new auction listings and ending soon alerts in your inbox every single morning. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.